You may have heard that meeting women is a numbers game. In fact, I see this in the comments on my videos all the time. But is this actually true? And does it even actually matter? Well, my contention is, yes, it very much matters. In fact, the use or misuse of this mentality is one of the biggest sticking points for tons of guys. So let's talk about how to get your mentality right and how to get the numbers game working in your favor. First up, let's talk about the benefits of the numbers game mentality. Well, if you're a beginner, this is one of the best mentalities you can take. It's a reassurance, it's a ray of hope if you're a beginner, because if you're a beginner and you're not getting success, the idea that it's a numbers game makes it all seem like there's more of a point to it, right? If you can say, oh, it's a numbers game, some girls are gonna like you, some girls are not gonna like you, the rejection didn't actually matter that much, the next one will be a better one. That's very encouraging for a beginner. And ironically, as a beginner, that's not quite true yet, right? If you're a true beginner, you're not even playing a numbers game yet. You're playing I'm doing a lot of approaches and none of my approaches are quite good enough. Once you're playing the numbers game, you're technically at a low level intermediate and you're playing a massive numbers game where you have to do tons and tons of approaches to get very few results. But the point is, this is an encouraging mindset. It's a mindset that allows you to treat every approach as a victory, which it is. And the thing is, the approach is a victory, not actually for that reason though. The approach is a victory because hopefully every single approach you do, you're learning from. Every single approach you're doing, you're improving. And every single approach you're doing, you're actually making your numbers game better, or you're getting closer to actually playing the numbers game. And that's actually why it's most beneficial. It's most beneficial to keep you going. It's most beneficial to keep you positive so you can continue to learn. Because if as a beginner, if you go out and you take every rejection, you get disappointed, you don't continue, you'll never get to any other phase. So now let's talk about the negatives of this numbers game approach. As I mentioned, once you've reached an intermediate level, it is technically true that a numbers game exists for you, in the sense that if you do enough approaches of the same quality, of the quality you're capable of, you will eventually get a result. And there is probably some average number that if you did the same approach over and over, you would get a certain percentage result. But here's the funny thing. Do you notice how I said the same approach over and over? Well, one of the definitions of being at an intermediate level is that you are wildly inconsistent. You're doing anything but the same approach over and over again. And so in a way, yes, the effect you're seeing in the real world seems like a numbers game and seems like the type of numbers game that would be modeled by you doing the same approach and getting a variety of random results. And it is true, there is a lot of randomness in game. Girls will be in different situations, some will be in a relationship, some will just like your look, etc. So there is that randomness. However, especially at a low intermediate level, there's probably more randomness in your input than there is randomness to the situation. And also the randomness to your input you can control, the randomness to the situation you can't. So I would equate it to, imagine if you were an archer, imagine you're a very bad archer and you want to hit a bullseye. The easiest way to do it would be just shoot arrows and shoot arrows and shoot arrows until you eventually hit the bullseye. However, so it seems like a numbers game, you shoot until you hit the bullseye. However, the bullseye shot would be the good shot, whereas the other ones would in fact be the bad shot, the poor technical shots, etc. So while this phenomenon of a numbers game will in fact exist, it's not a numbers game dictated solely by the randomness of the world. It's a numbers game dictated by your specific actions. And that really gets to the heart of how you should understand that numbers game and the entire idea of what you want to do as an intermediate. Because as an intermediate, the whole goal is to get past the numbers game, is to take control of the numbers game and improve the odds for yourself. So this idea that it's a numbers game is actually defeatist at an intermediate level. It's actually just kind of nihilistic and just saying, okay, it doesn't matter. And what ends up happening in practice is you see a lot of intermediate guys that end up doing reps just to do reps. Like, well, if I just do enough reps, I'll get a result. And it is true, if they do enough reps, meaning a huge number, they will eventually get a result, but they're not doing quality reps. They're not putting their heart and soul into the reps, and the numbers game in effect ends up being far worse than it would be. To give you more of a concrete example, let's say you're just doing approaches where you're going through the repetitions and just going through the motions. Maybe in that case, your numbers game as intermediate is 1 in 100. You're sleeping with or getting into a relationship with 1 in 100 girls you talk to. Whereas if you truly devoted yourself and brought your best to every single approach, maybe your numbers game would be 1 in 20. And so while there is a numbers game for whatever input you're putting in, the bigger factor to the numbers game is your actual input, right? And getting into this idea that I just need to do the reps, ends up with a lot of people repeating the same mistakes, going through the motions, not being present in the interactions with the girls, not analyzing their work, and therefore not improving. And so technically this numbers game becomes a purgatory where you're stuck with the same numbers game over and over and over again. So ironically, while at an intermediate level, the numbers game actually became a true model, whereas as a beginner it was not even true yet, it became a much less useful model. To the extent that it is useful as an intermediate, your goal should be to supersede the numbers game. Your goal should be to understand the numbers game and treat the numbers game as your enemy, right? Whereas as a beginner, you want to embrace the numbers game as a ray of hope. As an intermediate, you want to say, no, I'm going to move past the numbers game and take control of my own destiny with women. Very ironically, once you get to a very advanced level, that's when the actual mentality or the actual model of the numbers game actually does make sense, because in that case, you are bringing a good approach the vast majority of the time, and you'll start to see at that point that the variation in your results will actually have a lot more to do with the randomness of the situation, the randomness of the girl, than your own effort, because you now have a lot of talent and you've now built up a habit throughout your intermediate stage of bringing a good approach over and over again, and you're going to do that consistently. So now, once you're advanced, the model of the numbers game finally applies. However, at this point, it's irrelevant because you no longer need motivation to stay in the game. You no longer need the encouragement of the numbers game. And again, going through that intermediate phase, you are already trying to get past the numbers game. And as an advanced guy, you're trying even more so to take control of those tiny little variables to increase your percentages even more. So ironically, at a beginner level, the numbers game is useful, but not actually true. At an intermediate level, it's true, but not particularly useful unless you aspire to be past it. And at an advanced level, it actually is kind of irrelevant. But more important at every level is how do you improve? And there are two key takeaways for that. One is you want to aspire to your next stage. So at a beginner level, you want to aspire to make the numbers game a reality for you. At an intermediate level, you want to aspire to take control and not be a victim of the numbers game. And at every level, going through the motions is just a waste of time. Doing approaches just to run up numbers of approaches is not going to get you results, and it's not going to teach you anything. If you want to get to your goals in game, you need to be doing quality approaches, not just approaches for the sake of approaches. That's how you're going to get results. That's how you're going to learn. And fundamentally, the goal of all this numbers game nonsense is to get so good that the numbers game no longer applies to you.